Let's not forget that some of our own foreign policy as Americans, as the West, have fueled that extremism. When we support coup leaders in Egypt or other places, when we support dictatorship, repressive regimes around the world that push people over to the edge, then they become extremists, then they become terrorists. We are partly responsible.
All right, that is a representative from the group CARE in Los Angeles. Oh, we're partly responsible for the rise of radical jihadism and terrorism here. And, of course, more on our top story. And that, of course, is ISIS comes to America. What it tells us about this president, his policies, what impact it's going to have on the presidential election, especially in light of these new developments that we have today. That was the L.A. director for the Council on American Islamic Relations telling CNN those very things. Yeah, blame America first, always. Now we know that the shooters spend time in the hotbed of Pakistan, the terror hotbed of Pakistan, use social media to communicate with foreign and domestic extremists, being monitored by the FBI, the hallmarks of terrorism. And we find out that the shooter's wife had pledged allegiance to ISIS before the massacre. And they tried to destroy any evidence of a digital trail by smashing their computers and electronic devices, etc. We know that the Department of Homeland Security of Barack Obama cleared the San Bernardino terrorist shooter's wife for admission into the U.S. after giving her allegedly a thorough background check. Now, that raises questions about what it means for the Syrian refugees that the president keeps saying, well, they're women and orphans. Well, some women might be aligned with terror, as we just saw here. And the president claiming just before these attacks, just like he did before the terrorist attack in Paris, saying that, ISIS is contained. Just before this attack, he said that the U.S. was safe from an ISIS attack. And, of course, he still believes that the weather is a bigger threat to America than, of course, radical Islam. It's almost mind-boggling. Joining us now, Mike Evans, Middle East expert and author of the Columbus Code and a close confidant of the present and former prime ministers of Israel, Netanyahu and Perez. And Amer Zahr is with us, an Arab American speaker and specialist in issues impacting Arab and Muslim Americans. Amer, let me ask you. I think this is really important. When I hear CARE blame America, I'm thinking this group that was part of an unindicted co-conspirator group in the Holy Land Foundation case, back in 2007. I really don't want to hear that America's to blame for people sympathizing with ISIS and ISIS sympathizers being on American soil.
Well, obviously, everyone is to be responsible for their own actions. I mean, I'm not a spokesperson for CARE or anything. We do know that American military leaders, high-ranking ones, have come out in the past few weeks and said that American intervention in Iraq had a hand in creating and fostering ISIS. Now, whether or not
with all due respect, I disagree with that analysis, because I would argue that cities like Mosul and Ramadi and Fallujah and Tikrit that the United States were in full and complete control of, had we not rushed to get out of that war because it had been highly politicized by Obama, Hillary Clinton, and others, had we stayed the course and maintained the victories where Americans shed their blood and fought hard and won, that ISIS wouldn't have the landmass that they currently have, the largest of any terror group that I can think of in history, and the financial resources because of the oil fields that Obama was unwilling to bomb because of, quote, environmental damage. They wouldn't have the landmass. They wouldn't have the money that they have today. So I don't buy that. I think that's a crock, and I think that's an argument that's made by the left, and I don't blame America for the rise of radical Islamic terrorism. As the 9/11 Commission report said, they were at war with us. We weren't at war with them. This war has been going on with the Khobar Towers, the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania, the USS Cole, the first Trade Center bombing, up to 9/11 and up to this week. Radical Islamists have been at war with us.
American military generals said it. It's not me saying it, Sean. Before the pullout, these radical groups were already happening and growing up in Iraq. So American military analysts and generals have said openly that the American military intervention helped create an environment where these groups...
Well, give me a name, because...
That's nuts.
Give me a name of the person that you're quoting.
I forget exactly his name.
You forget his name.
In front of Congress.
You forget his name.
It's true. You know he said it. It would happen.
No, I don't know that he said it. And you're quoting somebody that you can't even quote. So I'll take it as not worthy of discussion. Now let me move on if I can, and let me bring in Mike Evans. Mike, I think my analysis of what happened in Iraq is far more accurate. Had we stayed and controlled the cities that Americans fought, bled, and died for, ISIS wouldn't have the landmass and the financial resources of the oil in Iraq.
Sean, you're 1,000,000% right. Israel is an example of that. Israel's been fighting terror for decades and decades. And by the way, it's been going on everywhere. I was in Iraq. I was with the Kurds in the north. Listen, radical Islam has only one agenda, and they're in bed. The radical Islam kills the body, and the liberal left kills the soul. So they're wonderful partners. It works very well with them. As long as we don't define it, as long as we play the game that it's really not radical Islam. I mean, you got a Jewish guy, Nicholas, that was just killed in San Bernardino. Who was he? By the way, Sean, he loved your show. You can go to his Facebook site. So many of your things are posted on his Facebook site.
On whose Facebook site?
Nicholas from San Bernardino, the one the terrorist was arguing with in the Christmas party. This is a Jewish guy who was a Christian who listened to your show. You can see a lot of your posts on his Facebook site.
So the guy that he had the argument with at the party is a fan of mine. I didn't look at his Facebook posts.
He
Wow.
He was a Jewish Christian, pro-Israel, and anti-radical Islam.
Wow.
Are you saying that he was targeted?
He was targeted. Listen, you can go and look and
there's no
see
evidence
the things
of that.
he says. Listen, this guy was also a member. We have something called the Jerusalem Prayer Team, and he was part of that too. Very pro-Israel guy, Jewish guy, Christian, very anti-radical Islam, very pro-Israel guy. Not a coincidence. Not a coincidence at all.
There was also a woman injured in the shooting who was a member of the same San Bernardino mosque that Sayed went 2 months ago. So, I mean, to pull something like that out to say he was targeted, there's no evidence for that whatsoever.
Do you not acknowledge that Muslim terrorists that are hijacking the Islamic religion now are in massive numbers, are creating this, advancing this caliphate, convert or die? Are you watching Boko Haram? Are you watching Al-Qaeda? Are you watching ISIS? Are you watching the Muslim Brotherhood? Are you watching Islamic Jihad? Are you watching all of these groups, all in the name of your religion, all out there in the name of that religion, killing innocent men, women, and children? Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
Look, there's no doubt that there's a political problem.
I didn't ask you if there's a political problem. Is there a problem with radicalized Islam? Is there a problem with Muslim terrorism?
Sure, if that's what you want to call it. To me, it's not a problem with the religion itself, and that's where I think the problem comes. When analysts get on TV and say this is a problem with Islam as a whole, with the religion.
Well, let's talk about the Prophet Muhammad. Wasn't the Prophet Muhammad a warrior?
Moses was a warrior.
Okay, well, all right, but I don't see it as exactly the same. Doesn't it say in the Quran, as you read it, take neither Christians or Jews for your friends? Doesn't it also talk about jihad and holy war and infidels and those that are non-believers? Doesn't it go into great depth about that?
I mean, doesn't Deuteronomy talk about some of these crazy things too? I mean, the point is this. If you take literally,
Amer, the only thing I would say to you is I don't see a Christian caliphate going on right now. I see a Muslim caliphate going on.
Well, first of all, ISIS, as far as a caliphate being supported by the majority of Muslims in the world, that's just not what's happening.
Maybe
right?
I'm not saying a majority, but I am saying the numbers that at least are sympathetic to and support Muslim terrorism are high, and the world is dealing with Muslim terrorists.
We don't know those numbers for sure. We know that ISIS, the United States government says ISIS has 30 to 50,000 members. And by the way, the commander that I forgot the name was Mike Flynn.
And how many does Al Qaeda have? And how many does Boko Haram have? And how many does all of these other terrorist groups have? And how many? Excuse me, let me finish. How many Muslim countries want to wipe Israel off the map?
Well, again, the Israeli question is not a question of radical Islam. In fact, many of the forces, I'm a Palestinian and I'm not a particularly religious person. I oppose Israel on secular, humanist, moral grounds. It has nothing to do with religion at all to me.
Yeah, and you mean, so does that mean you support Hamas and Hezbollah and other terror groups? I
actually don't support any of. I actually don't support.
Okay, and I've been to Israel and I've seen the weaponry that has been fired into Israeli towns and cities, and I've been to Sardot and these other places, and I've seen that kids can't even play outside because so many missiles are fired into that city. 10,000 in 10 years.
Have you been to Ramallah or Hebron and seen the Israeli military and how they treat Palestinians in those places?
Every instance, I don't care if you go back to 67 or 73, in every instance, hostilities have been brought to Israel, and Israel has defended itself. That is just historically a fact.
You know, Sean, Jews get killed in Israel for one reason. They're Jews. It's the same reason they kill Christians in Syria, in Iraq, and while they're Christian, killing Christians here. Because they're Christians.
Well, that's a lie.
Listen, I was with the Marines in 1983 in Lebanon. I slept on the beachhead. Hezbollah blew up every one of those kids. And by the way, they did it to the French, too, the same day. Radical Islam has been getting a free pass. They've been getting a free pass for decades as they've been growing and growing and growing. Well, how many of them? I traveled with Mohammed Khalid. He was the commander of the multinationals from Saudi Arabia. He told me during the Persian Gulf, only 10%, don't exaggerate, not more than 10% are fundamentalists. I said, excuse me, there's only 150 million of you that want to cut my head off. I'm comforted.
Now, this is ridiculous. Radical Islam, actually, back in the day, if you want to call it radical Islam, they were sitting in the White House with Ronald Reagan in the 80s. The Mujahideen were guests of the Reagan administration at one time. These are political problems that should be analyzed politically, not through the lens.
But they're using your Quran. They're using your religion, and the numbers.
Of course they use religion, and this is not a new thing in the history of the world. That radical political groups who have radical.
Okay, but we're dealing with modern day problems, a modern day caliphate, modern day Muslim terrorists, modern day destruction of innocent men, women, and children. And when I look at it, it seems that this cancer is growing.
Again, but when you
want to turn it into politics, but they're not using some type of political document as their motivation. They're using the words out of the Quran. They're quoting Allahu Akbar when they shoot innocent people.
Here's my concern, Sean, that when you start to say Islam is responsible or start to perpetuate any sort of idea.
Excuse me. I have made great distinctions on this program between radical Islamists, Muslim terrorists, and those that want to. Mike Gauss is a friend of mine, for example. Mike Gauss is not the problem. Zuhdi Jasser is not the problem. These are brave men and women that have spoken out against the hijacking of their religion, but they at least have the courage to say what you yourself refuse to say, that there are radical elements within Islam that are hijacking the religion in the name of their, quote, prophet and killing men, women, and children. And that this is now an existential threat to men, women, and children around the world, this advancing caliphate. And they have declared war against the Western world, and the Western world better wake its ass up and understand the nature of this enemy, because we don't understand what motivates them. Many more people, innocent people, will die. So I would assume you want to join with the free world and condemn Muslim terrorists.
Of course I condemn it, but that's a ridiculous thing to ask Muslims to condemn it as if they wouldn't condemn it. I mean, it's a dehumanizing thing to think that a certain group of people wouldn't condemn something that's
well, with all due respect, I condemn, as a Catholic, I condemn the Catholic Church when there was a sex scandal going on in the church. And frankly, I don't even go to the church as often as I used to in light of it. It has left such a horrible taste in my mouth.
But as a member of the media, you know very well that Muslim American organizations condemn on a daily basis.
Yeah, but then you have groups like CARE, and then they're blaming the United States, and you're seemingly agreeing with them.
I didn't agree with him once, Sean.
No, it sounded like you were defending what he said. Yeah, well, the United States does bear. So the United States, so what you initially said about the United States and their involvement in Iraq somehow caused the rise of radical jihadists, ignoring the Khobar Towers, ignoring the embassy bombings in Kenya, Tanzania, ignoring the USS Cole, ignoring the First Trade Center bombing, ignoring 9/11, ignoring all of that before anything happened in Iraq, and then you're saying that the U.S. somehow fighting back against radical Islamists caused this. That is just a crock and a lie. It's just not true. We're not responsible that people have bought into extremism and think that they're when they strap bombs on their own children that go into pizza parlors and malls and blow up innocent men, women, and children, that they're telling their kids they get 72 virgins in heaven. That's not America's fault, sir.
I didn't say any of that. What I said was people bear personal responsibility for their actions, but Mike Flynn, who was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, said that America's intervention in Iraq helped create and foster ISIS. That's exactly what I said. I wasn't talking about what you're calling radical Islam Islam around the world. That kind of thing has been a problem for a while. Again, we must...
Well, now you're backtracking from your initial statement, and if I had the time, I'd go back and play your own words for you, because you did say America's involvement in Iraq, did cause some of the rise of radicalism. And you ignored the whole history leading up to 9/11, 2001. All right, I got to go. My blood pressure's going through the roof here. 800-941-SEAN, our toll-free telephone number. You want to be a part of the program. We'll take a quick break, and we'll come back, and we'll get to your phone calls.